Welcome, everyone. It's good to see so many of you here. I'm going to kick us off by just doing a quick introduction of our panel and then talk through how we're going to spend the next hour and then get right into it. So first is Marissa Tarleton, who is our CMO of Retail Me Not. And then prior to that, she led marketing for Dell's North America Consumer and Small Business Organization and started her career in brand advertising. Mark Stouse is the CEO and founder of Proof Analytics. He's the former CMO of Honeywell and the former CCO of BMC Software and HP. And we have Ty Shea, who just joined Symantec as part of the acquisition of LifeLock and is now the CMO of Norton and LifeLock. And previous to that, many different jobs, both CMO and CEO, but notably launched the Esurance and Hotwire brands. So how we're going to structure the next hour, which I think is going to be interesting and provocative and hopefully very informative for all of you. We'll start off with a bit of a point of view presentation from Mark. And then we'll hear from Marissa and Ty a bit about their journeys through brand building and performance marketing in their careers. And then we'll turn the panel over to a bit of Q&A for hopefully a very interesting discussion. So without further ado, Mark.
Thanks so much. This is my 5th South by. It's hard to believe that. And one of the things that I love about it the most is that it happens here in Austin, the home of UT, hook 'em, okay? But the motto of UT is, this is where the world changes. This is where we change the world, right? And that is what South by is, and that's one of the great things about it. We all come here to talk and to learn and to share and to change the world in which we live. What I want to talk about today is kind of a perennial conversation that we've all had in marketing for a long time, right? You have the brand people, you have the performance or the revenue marketing people, you know, and there's always kind of this back and forth that exists. And by the nature of marketing, right, there's a lot of on-the-job learning that happens. People develop a point of view based upon what they think they see, but rarely have we actually had the analytics to show how people actually buy. So I'm going to kind of give you this as a fundamental premise, that we have been faced with a false choice, that it is not one or the other, or some significant skew back and forth, right? But very much both. Because this is about the audience. This is about what it takes for people to buy. You think about it in your own life, right? What is it that you need? You need a mechanism. You need a way of interacting with the brand and buying something, you know, mechanically, a process that you move through. But you also are looking for some big answers to some big questions. Psychographically, we're going to talk about these in a little bit. But they come down to the fact that when you have a false choice, you have no choice at all. So right now, kind of the way people are thinking about it is that performance marketing is about making a material contribution that can somehow be measured and understood, right, on the financial statement. Brand is this ethereal thing that floats out there, usually captured on the balance sheet. What we have found in the analytics actually is that brand monetizes heavily in the financial statement. So performance marketing, right? So we're extending kind of this little brief conversation here about the common understandings of this. Performance marketing, commonly understood to be mainly, but not exclusively, top of the funnel set of investments and impacts, right? And it's really kind of this mechanism, right? That's what we find, that's what the analytics show, is that beyond this idea of placement in the funnel, that this is something that customers are interacting with constantly throughout the process, from the very beginning to the very end. Brand, right, is thought of primarily by many marketers in terms of awareness building and loyalty, okay? But not fully appreciated as some of the key factors that help people buy more and buy faster. So these two things, right, if we kind of accept for the sake of this conversation that the mission of marketing is to help people, customers, more of them, buy more, faster, and at higher prices than they otherwise would, right? And if that is the net additive benefit of marketing and branding, then now we're going to a better understanding of what is actually happening based on the analytics. So performance marketing, the mechanism, it yields revenue, margin, and cash flow, right? It is a process, it is a thing, right? It is a step of a series of touches, of steps. And clearly, we want to understand those. But that is a machine that has been built to help people buy and to help the vendor process those transactions. Brand marketing is the grease on the gears of that mechanism. So the data, the analytics, the cause and effect analysis on this is extremely clear, and it intensifies dramatically as the risk of failure goes up on the business decision and the cost. So if we're talking about a $5 item, right, not so crucial, right? Brand in that sense is awareness and kind of how you feel about it. Do they support this, does that company support the causes that I care about and things of this nature, right? But as it goes up and up and up in cost and risk, what we're really talking about here is trust and confidence. So we've all seen awareness, consideration, preference, and purchase, right? This is an old standby in the marketing space and sales space. But it is a vendor-centric perspective of the customer purchase process. This is the way that vendors like to think about what customers are moving through, but so it gets at the what and the how. But if you watch Simon Sinek, right, you already know the answer to this, right? The most important question of all is why. So about 10 years or so ago, when we were working on this problem at HP and then at BMC, we started running into the then very nascent area of customer decision psychographic research. This is primarily Princeton at the time. It's now exploded into all of the, Stanford and all the rest of the institutions that you would expect study this. The academics have kind of framed this over time in terms of awareness, confidence, and trust. If that sounds an awful lot like brand to you, right? Call me silly, right? But that's really what it is. This is what they're searching for, right, as they move and spiral through this funnel, right? So the funnel is not this orderly little thing, right? It has a lot of chaos inside of it. You know, if you kind of are familiar with the DNA helix, right, that's a sort of the way it feels and looks to a lot of people. This is really, if you are trying to make a connection and help people, more people, buy more, faster, and at a higher price than they otherwise would, these are the core issues that you have to deal with. So, Nirvana in all this. This is a high-level image that shows you a pretty much fail-safe point of integration and optimization. And just to kind of take you through it, right, the way this works is you have revenue, margin, and cash flow at the top, but it could be anything else that you care about. The relationship between that and sales performance, which is the second stripe, more deals, bigger deals, faster deals. So this is this idea that I was communicating earlier. All of that is understood, right? If your average time to close on deals is faster and faster, your cash flow from revenue is going to be better and better. So if you are marketing and communications and you are on the bottom of this, right, and you're saying to yourself, hey, I'm trying to influence the ability of my company to do more deals, bigger deals, faster deals. How do I do that? Well, clearly, it's through the impact that you have on your audience. And even though we have today a large amount of highly detailed activities, you know, customization, personalization, all this kind of stuff, right? It ultimately still has to work in the aggregate. So this is where statistical analysis is really important, right? Because you can always find somebody who's doing what you want them to do, right? But is the whole crowd kind of moving in that same direction? So the ability to really foster awareness, confidence, and trust here in your audience is actually highly correlated vertically with each one of these business objectives. Paid and owned, and then what we typically a lot of times call earned and shared, right? The different parts of marketing. This is how they are maximized in terms of their impact. So again, not my opinion, right? This is the data talking. No surprise, paid and owned, fully optimized for the top of the funnel. I don't think anyone is surprised about that. What might be a surprise to some, though, is the extent to which customers disconnect from those channels about halfway through the process and spend the rest of the time operating in independent channels where your brand is what is really cutting a lot of ice, right? Your brand and peer-to-peer interaction, right? Because the whole nut of this last part of the decision process is about risk. No one wants to be wrong, right? No one, whether it is with your boss or with your spouse, okay? You don't want to be wrong. You don't want to go home and say, gee, honey, shouldn't have made that decision, should have made this other one over here. We see this with our client base, for example, hotels. You wouldn't think that hotels would kind of be like B2B and long cycle and all that kind of those attributes, right? But the way that a family thinks about their summer vacation, they spend the longest amount of time picking the hotel of anything else that they do in that vacation. They take 5 to 6 months in some cases, right, to figure it out. Why is that? Because whoever is planning it doesn't want to get there and realize they should have stayed across the street and their family's all mad at them, right? So that's kind of like reducing it down to something really approachable. But imagine if you're also doing a $300 million aviation deal, you might not want to be wrong on that. That might be a deal killer. So last slide here, flip sides of the same coin, right? These are two things that work together. And actually, and this is one of my big statements on this, this is a little controversial, but particularly in B2B, the skew on spend here a lot of times is wrong. So usually 70 to 80% is top of the funnel and bottom of the funnel, so comms and earned and all this kind of stuff kind of gets what's left. As the risk, the real and perceived risk of your audience on the buy decision goes, that last part is the most important part. The SKUs should, at a minimum, be far better balanced than they are. Thank you very much.
All right, so we just wanted to spend a couple minutes hearing a little bit from Marissa and Ty on kind of their journeys with brand and performance marketing through their very impressive careers. Do you want to start, Ty?
Sure. So no matter what anyone tells you, I think there's a lot of luck involved in your journey. So mine, actually, I grew up in the Midwest in Peoria, Illinois. I have a non-traditional background for marketer. I actually majored in accounting, passed my CPA exam, worked in investment banking, hated it. So then I went back to school at Stanford, and I actually had a really good marketing professor, and thought I'd try that, and I did about the most unsexy thing you can do if you're at Stanford. I went and worked at Procter & Gamble in Cincinnati. So everyone was asking me what I was doing, but I actually felt like, you know, marketing is a craft and a skill, and I wanted to learn from a world-class organization. So I ended up going back to Cincinnati into the Midwest, really learned a lot about how to build products as well as marketing around consumer needs. But actually, after having been then on the West Coast, fell in love with the Bay Area, so didn't want to go back to Cincinnati, and ended up working at Clorox, which is in the Bay Area. So from there, I got recruited during the dot-com craze to help launch a company called Esurance. So bought the URL for that, we launched it, and that was luck, because at Esurance, we actually were an insurance company, and I was actually seated right next to the data mining actuary people from the insurance business. So I actually learned about these things: lifetime value, churn, LTV, things that are pretty commonly understood now in e-commerce, but back in '99, nobody was really thinking like that. So that was lucky. Then I got recruited to help launch a company called Hotwire, which was also lucky because Hotwire was incubated out of a private equity company, TPG, Texas Pacific Group. So if any of you have any experience with private equity, you know that you're going to get drilled on dashboards, KPIs, et cetera. So I went to a world where we launched this company, and from the ground up, we did it like private equity people would, where marketing owned all the revenue, so we actually led all the company forecast meetings. So once again, lucky to have that experience. So we did a lot of good things there, and then we were bought by Expedia. At that time, I thought it was good to do my entrepreneurial dream, so I started my own company, which is called Fan IQ, which is a sports social game site. This is around 2006, about the same time Facebook was getting speed. I actually envisioned that there would be, social networks would be vertical. I could never imagine what Facebook has become, one huge social network that connected everyone. But the good thing about starting my own company was I actually had no money. So then I had to learn, how do you market without money? And that's where I actually learned what everyone now calls growth hacking. So how do you grow through product experience, through using your user base, through user-generated content. So we were able to grow to about 12 million users without spending any money, but we couldn't really monetize the product. So sold that. That was not a great outcome. And then since then, I've been helping, kind of thought about what I wanted to do, and what I really like to do is help companies grow. So I helped a company called Square Trade, which sells phone insurance. We built out a marketing team there, sold, I think, last year to Allstate. And then I've been, as Mary talked about, I've been part of LifeLock for the last 3 years. A year ago, we were purchased by Symantec. And kind of one thing that I'm doing is I enter a large company, Symantec, again, after being at startups in a while. And one thing I was telling Mary was, I come in an organization that's pretty product-driven. And so I've had people within Symantec tell me that they don't really believe there's a link between marketing and revenue. So part of my job now is to actually establish how marketing leads to revenue and growth. And so that's our journey. And now it's with the Norton and LifeLock brands globally. So it's an exciting opportunity.
Cool.
Okay, I feel like my journey is so much simpler than Ty's. I'm going to need to make some stuff up along the way. A little bit with luck as well, I landed one of my first jobs on what I consider one of the most powerful brands in the world. I worked on the IBM brand advertising campaign. It was one of my first jobs out of school, and I was a political science and Asian studies major, so clearly very relevant to my undergraduate degree from a liberal arts school in the Northeast. But I was sort of drawn to Ogilvy, which is the agency I worked at in New York, because they were an agency in the late 90s building brands. And I knew I felt a lot of passion for being a part of building a brand and getting as close as I could to the consumer mindset of how do you create engagement with the consumer around a brand, how do you give the brand meaning, how do you create some level of energy and passion behind this brand. So I learned kind of at an early stage in my career 2 things. One, I believed and was passionate about being involved in big brands, and 2, I loved the e-commerce space. So my first job was all about introducing IBM in this e-commerce landscape in 1999, basically. I quickly moved on to business school because I realized at an agency I wasn't close enough to actually driving those initiatives and marketing strategies. I needed to be on the inside at a brand like that, so I went to business school. And then very quickly right after that joined Dell. And Dell was a very traditional advertising and marketing approach. I felt like I was looking at both performance and brand marketing strategies, but it was this constant battle to prove that the brand was eroding and we needed to fight for 20% of our media mix to be allocated to more upper funnel. It was very traditional conversations and a constant battle around, as a publicly traded company as I joined, how do you balance the short term versus the long term? So conversations I'm sure many of you all have every single day. But a really good learning experience around data-driven marketing, a ton of consumer data, and balancing both short-term ROI with long-term brand gains, specifically in the consumer space. About 3 years ago, I left Dell and joined RetailMeNot, a very different company. For those of you who don't know RetailMeNot, we are a marketplace and a savings destination that connects millions of consumers to retailers and brands through this concept of savings. Started as a coupon company and an affiliate. It's become much more. And the reason I joined the company is because I wanted to be a part of that brand transformation. We had access to millions of consumers from a data perspective and a marketing perspective. We were not effectively engaging them. And the brand, while it had really high awareness, consumers didn't understand the depth of what we could do for them, and neither did our B2B retailers and brand customers. So the opportunity there was significant for me to come in as a marketer. The thing that's interesting about RetailMeNot and companies like RetailMeNot over the last 3 years is that here, where I am now, there is no difference between brand and performance. So where I spent all these years at Dell arguing the media mix and fighting for the 20% allocation to upper funnel, we build our brand today through performance media at RetailMeNot, and that's one of the things I love about being in Austin, working for a mobile-first company. It's just been such an exciting learning experience for me to start as this very traditional brand advertiser, go through sort of the 2000s at a very traditional company, and then land and learn from marketers on my organization that are much smarter than me around this concept of performance and brand becoming one.
Yeah, and that sounds, I mean, that's very progressive, and I think that's where the industry is really going, so one of the great reasons why you're here. So now we're gonna jump right into the panel questions, and I wanna start kind of simple, which is really this concept or term performance marketing. I know that, Mark gave a very clear point of view on what it is and kind of what it isn't, but it's thrown around a lot right now. It's kind of like it's the content marketing for 2018, right? Agencies are throwing it all over their websites. It's kind of the marketing buzzword, I would say, du jour at the moment. So my question for all of you, and again, we heard pretty clearly from you, but how do you define performance marketing? I mean, and I preface this by saying, in doing my research for this panel, and I've seen it discussed and the way that it's being branded across the industry, it's everything from paid media to analytics-driven marketing. Right. So I do feel like there's a bit of confusion in the marketplace almost of when we use that term. So sure. That's kind of the first part of the question. The second is, knowing that it is kind of the buzzword du jour currently, do we think performance marketing has staying power? i.e., 5 years from now, are we going to be talking about performance marketing and using the term performance marketing on this stage?
Yeah, sure. I'll start. So performance marketing, I think, is changing already just in the last few years. So I would categorize it as ROI-driven, data-driven, measurable. And that can be true for really any ad dollar you put anywhere, right? Including television. Just put that aside for just a second, but that's how I would define performance marketing. I think it's been best captured as targeting the right person at the right place at the right time. So it's intelligent marketing that's measurable. And I think what's interesting about it is a few years back, it was really only digital. I don't know if anybody else had a performance marketing team that was really just the digital team. And where I see it going, I think we will still be talking about performance marketing, but it won't be just digital, and it's already changed so that it's not just digital. It will be radio. It will be print. Performance marketing doesn't need to be just digital, and I think that's one of the cool things about recruiting, hiring, and educating people in this is I think performance marketing will sort of take over the entire media mix. It just has to be measurable and data-driven.
I really agree with that. I would just add, if you talk to a CFO, a CEO, anybody like that, they don't make a distinction.
Right.
It's all performing or it's not performing, right? The challenge with brand historically, right, however you want to kind of define that, is that it is a longer term play. Its impact is felt differently than this mechanism that we commonly think of as digital or performance marketing. So if you don't know the time lags involved, you have no way of ascertaining the value that's being delivered by brand. And this is why a lot of business leaders have always thought about brand as, like when marketers talk about brand, they're like, oh my God, not the B word again, right? Because it's this really airy-fairy kind of ethereal sort of thing to them, right? But not when all of a sudden you can show them how it monetizes. It just monetizes differently. So I think that we will be talking about performance marketing because it's what the business cares about, but performance marketing is an idea that to them encompasses everything we do.
Yeah, just adding to Marissa and Mark said, I think performance marketing is accountability. And I think that going forward, I do believe that all marketers will need to be accountable. And what that means is we talk about our mission as we turn marketing budget into growth, revenue, and profits. So as a marketer, I think you need to own those things. I think that brand is one of the key tools that we use. It's one of our most powerful tools to do that. But I do believe that that trend, 5 years from now, if you're not an accountable marketer, I think there'll be fewer and fewer organizations that will put you in charge.
Cool. So one of the things that's really fascinating to me about this topic and the passion point for me is the intersection of creative and performance marketing. And I think, there's potentially some inherent conflict there, and I'd love to explore that a little bit with you all. And I'll just set that up by saying, one of the building blocks of an iconic brand arguably is really creative thinking and really creative thinkers on thinking about the brand, et cetera. But obviously, you could argue, but let's talk about it. Creative thinking and creative thinkers don't necessarily fit into the box of a metrics to play approach or performance marketing approach. So my question is, how do you make sure that you don't crush the art of creativity that establishes iconic brands with the science that is supposed to sustain and measure it?
You want me to start?
Go ahead.
Go for it.
Yeah.
So I think storytelling and creativity are super important. Once again, another really, really important tool for marketers. So for my journey, one thing we've done is we build internal creative teams. And so, but I think, when we build our internal creative team, the one thing that I want to be sure of is that the creatives we hire, and they're really great creatives, understand that our mission is to actually sell stuff and make money. And so I think that underlying that, but there are actually, you can produce great creative and sell stuff and make money, or you can produce really poor creative and do the same thing. So I do think that creativity is super important. What we try to do is when we do TV advertising or we do radio or anything, we actually try to, the agreed upon performance metric that it's kind of measurable is we do a lot of testing, consumer testing, and the key metric is purchase intent. After seeing this advertisement, do people want to buy it? So that's the key metric. How creative or how great it is, that's the creative challenge for them. We want them to produce work they're really proud of.
Yes.
The thing we found is once creatives buy into this, that the better stuff sells, the more money we get to spend, and actually the more risks they can take with their creative. Once you have a foundation of stuff that's making money, then you can go do some crazier things that are harder to measure. So it creates a vicious cycle. It's one of trust, but I absolutely believe that great creative and great storytelling are instrumental to good performance marketing.
Yeah, I think that, again, this is sort of an example of a false choice that we have presented ourselves with as marketers, right? If you believe that analytics and data are a judge in black robes saying you either suck or you're great, okay, then you're going to look at that as suppressing creative. But what analytics and data really are for creative is a coach and a bodyguard, right? The coach makes it better, and the being able to prove its impact is the bodyguard piece, right? That says, hey, we didn't just do art, we actually made art serve the business. I think that that's key, and I think in many cases what we're seeing right now, particularly in the agency space, right, and particularly on the ad agency side, but you're also seeing in the PR agency, is that these creative-led, so-called creative-led strategies are failing. Not because creative isn't important, but because they haven't been able or willing or whatever, right, to tie it to the business impact.
So I'll add to both of those points, which I agree with, another thought that I think has been relevant to me at Retail Me Not. We used to plan creative based on the channel. Does anybody remember where the whole campaign and creative strategy started with a TV ad? And now, what we do at Retail Me Not, and I think a lot of mobile-first companies do, is the brand insight and the creative message is still critical, but it's a message. It's a claim, it's a value proposition, it's not an asset. Because what's happening in asset creation and creative development, in my opinion, is it's no longer one asset going to many, right? We're used to build 10 different assets as part of your creative strategy and your brand strategy, and then you would say go. And it was one to many. Now what we have with this more data-driven performance marketing structure is the ability to make your brand and creative asset one-to-one. Not for everything, but for many of my channels, it's one-to-one, which means what's happened in the creative development is where we were creating 50 assets a quarter, we're now creating 5,000.
Got it.
And the implications to that are significant. And what that means is you have to work with either your own internal creative partners or agency partners that are prepared for that. It means to some extent a letting go of the implementation at the channel level. That means you have to have a very sound brand and messaging strategy at the start in order to be able to let it go and outsource it. But I think that the opportunity is significant. The brand message is still critical, but you're delivering it in 1,000 different formats with 1,000 different variations to make sure that it works and it's powerful and isn't accountable. Versus one asset, let's see how it works, to the masses.
Got it. So really creative in service of performance marketing and hopefully allowing for even greater creative exploration when it works.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we all, well, maybe not, but the business leaders want marketing to be a variable cost tied to whatever it's generating, right? And I want the sunk cost. So if we can show that creative is driving it, right, then they'll give you more money. It's that simple.
It's a great message for creative directors.
I think Mark had a good point. I think a lot of analogies behind the Moneyball and if any of you are sports fans, the analytics movement in sports, where it's another tool, it's another measure that can help coaches or GMs make decisions. I think there's a lot of, it's not old school talent, coaching doesn't matter or scouting doesn't matter. We have more tools and toolboxes and more feedback mechanisms to make good decisions.
So I'm going to get a little bit of tactical because I think that folks in the room, I think, could use a little bit of that really down to earth, how does this work in your day-to-day lives, in your roles. So focusing a bit on platforms and data, turning the page to that, specifically customer behavior, predictive analysis, et cetera. How are you incorporating kind of this toolbox of data analytics and platforms into your day-to-day decision making? And where do you think that there are still gaps? And anyone can go first.
I'll start. Tactically, we probably have more data than we still know what to do with in-house, and then data that we also partner with. I think data is one of the the coolest opportunities with performance marketing is not only leverage your own first-party data, but then second-party and third-party data to get even better targeting. I think one of the things that we're doing in-house that I find most interesting is this move from just smart acquisition into smart retention and lifetime value. And that's something that we absolutely we breed as part of our culture. One of our values is data-driven perspective and approach, and we actually hire data-driven marketers that are very comfortable spending significant parts of their time in Tableau to make sure that they're making the right decisions. That said, we also believe that some people can do things better than we can, and we work with third-party partners in things like multi-touch attribution to make sure that we have a sounding board for the right both short-term and long-term investment.
Where do those marketers come from? Those data-savvy marketers?
It's a secret. You know, some of them
Asking for a friend.
Some of them we actually recruit through BA organizations, but some of them, honestly, like back to my point earlier, these are digital marketers. A lot of them started in SEM type jobs, and or they came from digital agencies, and we brought them in-house to give us better perspective. And then they've learned about brand over time because they've converged within my culture.
That's a good learning for folks in this room.
You know, you know, we're seeing MarTech right now, which has spun out a ton of awesome data that never existed before, kind of sliding into what Gartner calls the trough of disillusionment, right? There's a lot of different reasons for that, right? There's, in many marketing organizations, there's a lack of capacity and capability, right? So a lot of marketers, we're kind of in this nebulous zone right now where you have some marketing organizations that have a lot of competence around data, and I think, have to say that most don't, right? So this is part of the issue. The biggest issue of all, though, what's really missing from the whole thing, if you talk to business leaders, is this roll-up, this, if you will, a business analytic roll-up of all this marketing data, audience data, sales data, other kinds of data that says, hey, this is actually what is happening. These are, I'm using this phrase colloquially, right? These are the causes and the effects, right? This is the ripple effect of the investment over time. This is where we are on the S-curve of investment. Right? Most marketers think that they're low on the S-curve, right? Give us more money and we've got lots of headroom. Most finance leaders will tell you that they think that that marketing is at the top of the S-curve, maybe even past the point of diminishing returns. Sometimes, right, one or the other is correct. Most of the time, no surprise, the truth is somewhere in the middle, right? But if you don't know where you are on that, if you can't take all of this data and make that kind of sense of it, that's the biggest problem, right? And again, you see it right now in the way that C-suites are reacting to marketing and marketing investment issues, right? I mean, it's very much out there.
I'll speak tactically, organizational. I would agree with Marissa, there's too much data and almost data overload. So tactically, for those of you, I think the important to me, one of the keys is to have a marketing analytics department and to have that department be really responsible for telling you if you're spending your money wisely. I actually think it's also important, at least the way we've structured it, is it's separate than the people that actually spend the money. So they're not subservient to that group, they're actually equal partners. They're a service organization to structure to partner with the people who are spending money on TV, radio, et cetera, to make good decisions. But they're also equals in that they can tell me or tell them that, you know what, we think there's a better way to do it. So they're not subservient. So structurally, I think that as a marketing team, you know, the first people I would hire would be an analytics department to actually understand how the money is being spent and whether it's being spent well, and then to tactically separate it out from the people who are spending the money.
That's really, I mean, that was right on. I think that the other part, though, is that what we're already seeing is that centralized approach is really, really necessary right now because of where the maturity curve is in the larger marketing organization, but that organizations are also moving increasingly to highly distributed, democratized, fully democratized analytics that are structured where anyone can use them, right? And that's a mechanism by which they get better decision making out to the edge.
The one thing I would add is I witnessed just sort of with some of my peers this concept that marketers may not always be data driven. And I believe in a third party, especially to separate church and state to some extent, but I also think that there's a modern version of marketers and CMOs that have to be data driven. And if you allow a third party to do that, I think you run the risk of marketers just being about the brand. And that's something we're trying to break down. Again, I'm in a much smaller organization though, so I don't necessarily have the ability to go build a second team. I do think though there is this trend and perception and reputation of marketers being only about the brand, and I think we all have to take an active role in changing that, because that's not just what we do.
Absolutely. So kind of shifting gears a little bit, how performance marketing is really impacting the overall industry, as well as, frankly, your jobs as CMOs and also agencies, really. I'd love to talk a little bit about that and start with a bit of an adjacent topic, which is around kind of the organization of communications and marketing in your organizations and the organizations that you've been a part of, as well as kind of what you're witnessing in the marketplace. And I'll just say that there are a number of organizations, perhaps not yours right now, but that are considering or have merged the communications and marketing functions. And it's really kind of to reflect kind of the digital reality that customers receive information in kind of a uniform way, which is through digital, not necessarily through a channel approach. So I guess my question to you guys is, first of all, do you think it's the right thing to do? Second, what are the pros and the cons, and do you think that's going to continue to advance, or will it retreat back to marketing and comms? It's a good one.
I'll start. I think that the intersection of marketing and communication is significant, and my team sort of feels some of that pain on a day-to-day basis. A few of them are sitting right in front and I'm sure are nodding. In my opinion, it's about the consumer and or the customer. So we look at our organizational structure around our B2B customers, our brands, our retailers, our restaurants that pay us to be part of our marketplace, and then we look at it from a consumer perspective. And my communications and my marketing leader under consumer are close partners around how we go to market, because it's no longer just online and offline campaigns. It's campaigns that reach the consumer that intersect between marketing and communications. Influencers is a really good example. Our influencer strategy, Kristen, who leads that for me in the front row right here, is smiling. It intersects multiple organizations across communications and marketing, even down to performance. And that is sticky to manage. But again, I think if you think about your organizational structure oriented at your customer, not your channel, you have more of a likelihood of being successful and looking at the data more holistically.
I think what is challenging about it is that it's two very different cultures, right? One, on the marketing side, it prizes orchestration and control, right? Even in the modern era, right, where you're dealing a lot directly with customers, right? So you're giving up control. It's still very much about control. Communications, on the other hand, is very different in the sense that no one is forcing a reporter or an analyst or an influencer or whoever it happens to be, right, to do anything, right? So it is one of the big misconceptions that I see with CMOs today is that they will discount the earned space, right, or the peer-to-peer space, because they can't control it, because they can't evaluate it as clearly or as simply as they can, with some of the other channels that they work with. So I think that the other wild card in this whole thing is what is changing up top. So we've already seen, just in the last month or so, 4 Fortune 1000s make a choice to go in a different direction, away from the CMO to a CGO who is either a salesperson or an ops person. So this changes the dynamic significantly. And if we continue to see that kind of thing, I think that you will start to see a retrenchment of these two functions away from each other, which is not necessarily the thing I'm advocating for, by the way, but I think that you'll see it. Right?
That's not necessarily right for consumers.
Yeah. Sorry?
But not necessarily the right thing for consumers.
Or the business.
Yeah.
Right? But I think that you will start to see that. So.
Anything to add?
Yeah, once again, as a performance marketer, I do think your brand and the stories that you tell super, super important. And probably one of the biggest dimensions of performance marketing is the quality of your story. So as Marissa was saying, now a story gets filtered through thousands of different channels. I would agree with Mark that owned and earned is a different system. Mechanism is not pay for play per se. But I do think it's very important that those stories, back to whatever the brand story is, back to whatever your current, lack of a better word, messages or campaign is, needs to be thought structurally through each channel, including PR, and make sure that they sync up and that you're all telling maybe variations, but all laddering up to the same macro message.
So let's talk a little bit about your job security. So the average lifespan of a CMO is 4 years. So that's, pretty short, not exactly a retirement building. So what would your advice be to your fellow CEOs and your peers about how to lengthen your lifespan in the job?
I feel like Ty should start that.
Well, I will say, so when I started at LifeLock 3 years ago, I think we had 4 CMOs in 5 years or something. So there was literally a betting pool within the marketing department about whether I'd last a year. So it's been 3 years. I think the biggest thing that I advise companies, and these are smaller companies or startups, embrace accountability.
Yeah.
It's coming, so embrace it. Get ahead of it. And so figure it's not an easy thing to do about figuring out how to tell the story of how your budget translates into revenue. But figure out that's your job, is to drive revenue, embrace it, and embrace. I think that's the most important thing, because if you don't embrace that and you start arguing for, like you said, a 20% brand budget or a 50% brand budget because you need that to do performance marketing, I advise companies, you're going to fail and you're going to get fired because it's not going to work. So I would say the most important thing is you have the right mindset that, look, I embrace accountability for driving revenue and new customers. I think brand is a very important tool to use that. It's just one of many tools that I use. And I think if you start with that mindset, you're much more likely to be successful.
Yeah. I think that this is going to sound really glib, right, to put it this way, but you have to be a business person who happens to specialize in marketing or communications.
I agree.
Right? This means really knowing how your business operates. How does your business make money? Some products make a lot of money. Some products make a little bit of money, but a lot of revenue, right? So really understanding what the drivers are and what the problems are and how you can bring marketing and communications to bear on those problems, and starting there, and very much like my last slide, right, where you show that deconstruction, peeling the onion back again and again and again. Most marketers and communicators, it's getting better, right, but they start with all the stuff that they do and then try to find justification for it, instead of saying, hey, here are the business problems, and now we're going to reverse engineer this all the way back down, and that's going to tell us what we should be doing. That's where the security is, in the sense that there is any security at all, right? This is the other thing, right? It's not just CMOs that are under the gun. Everybody's under the gun, right? If you look at all the major roles, tenure has fallen. it's fallen the worst for the CMO right now. But I can remember a time 10 years ago where the CIO was at the bottom, right? So, you know.
Yeah, a couple things to add. I truly think that the evolution of the CMO role is changing, and I think that CMO positions will potentially stop existing as we know it. I think for a couple of reasons, many of which we've talked about. I think the way consumers are shopping has changed the way marketers need to plan to go to market and engage consumers. If you look at some of the trends just in voice as an example, the majority of consumers will be using voice to do their day-to-day shopping on a day-to-day basis over the next 3 years, according to ComScore. What does that mean to brand marketers and CMOs who are looking to get their brands in front of their consumers when they're shopping for the word battery, not the word Duracell battery? So I think the most important thing that CMOs and marketers can be doing is innovating versus protecting. Most marketers come in and they want to protect their budget, and they want to defend their headcount, and they want to prove why they need more. I feel like the better choice is to come in and almost rebuild, and from the bottom up, and decide what you need versus defend, and decide what you need with significant lean in towards innovation and where consumers are going to be shopping in 3 years versus what they were doing 5 years back with regards to media consumption and shopping.
Can I say one more thing on this?
Please.
One of the things that we're, as we work with customers, that we're starting to see, and it's very nascent, right? But a major board member for Raytheon actually went on the record and wrote an op-ed about this not too long ago. And that is starting to move to a situation where marketers are compensated, both internal teams and agencies, more and more and more based upon impact and value creation, right? It's not that, you know, just like sales guys have a base salary, right, and then a bunch of commissions, right? That's where the business is wanting to go, right? So it is about accountability, but it's also about frustration. There's a tremendous amount. We're getting ready to release survey results pretty soon of a Fortune 1000 C-suite survey that shows that the frustration on a lot of this stuff is off the charts, right? It's been building for a long time. It is now hitting a crescendo. So if you look at that kind of stuff, and you think about, okay, how do I need to position myself so that I not only survive but continue to have value, right? It is to start to think about these kinds of things, right? That level of accountability. I believe so much in what I do that I'm willing to be compensated based on the value that I create.
So what I'm hearing, and I agree, is that, and the reality is that CMOs are not just responsible for the pretty advertising, they are responsible for the business, for the health of the business, the growth of the business. So with that in mind, and knowing that several of you have had these roles at various times in your careers, does the CMO role provide a good training ground to become the CEO? And do you want to be the CEO?
Well, I probably should go because I am. So I am one of those people that has made that transition. I mean, to be perfectly, totally, ruthlessly candid, right? What made me able to be a CEO today was being beaten across the head and shoulders by countless boards and C-suites, right? Very much like your experience, right, with the PE stuff. When that is a training ground like no other, right? I think that if you can learn from that as opposed to getting pissed off and resentful about that, that's how you make that transition, right? The other thing I would just say in my own experience is that I went from a situation where I was sort of, I always hesitate to use this word, right? But I had sort of mastered my profession in a sense, right? I mean, I continued to learn, but it was more in the edges, right, kind of thing, to a place where I spend 90% of my day in areas where a year or 2 years ago, my knowledge base was a lot less than it is today. So I've been on a major learning curve. I think that marketers actually are very good at this, right? We tend to be very elastic in the way that we approach things. We think not in a non-linear fashion in many cases. So I think that helps.
Anything to add?
I would just add that I think the most successful marketers I meet are the ones that have a GM-like perspective on how they're running the business. And that's how I approach it. And with that, I think that there's great marketing jobs that can do that well, and there's great CEO jobs that can do that well, and I'll continue to explore any job that allows me to operate more like a GM, and if that's in marketing, great, I love that, and if that's a CEO, I'll take that too.
Cool.
Yep. I think there are a lot of similarities. I think like my job is set a vision, recruit an amazing team, and then set a culture, right? I think that's really a good CEO's job as well. So as I told you, I was actually CEO of my startup company.
Yeah.
What I found with that is there are a lot of parts of that job I didn't actually enjoy. So I enjoyed the marketing part. So I think that's something that I wrestle with is, is that thing of, do you want to be the best CMO or do you want to be a CEO? So I'd say I still have a little internal conflict over that.
Conflict.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're nearing the end of our hour, which has gone so incredibly fast because this has been an awesome conversation. But I had one last question, and we may have a couple minutes for questions from the audience. So in the context of all of this, of the advent of performance marketing, brand still matters, but everything's kind of in flux. What is the role of agencies? And I guess more to the point, are agencies still relevant? Do you think they're still going to be around in 5 years? And if they are, what should they look like? What skills do they need to possess? And what should they shed?
Hugely relevant. Doesn't seem that way right now because the problem is with the business model, not with the people or the creativity or the thinking. The analytics show very clearly, right, that whether we're talking about agencies or internal, right, the vast majority of marketing teams, to include agencies, right, are delivering a lot of business value. That is an absolute statement that I can make based on the analytics. However, right, the days of time and materials billing, fee billing, billing that is not tied in any way, shape, or form to outcomes, that is a dead horse. And you're seeing it in the performance of a lot of large agencies and agency holding companies. W2O is a notable exception, right? Truly, right? And there are a few others that are also there, but the vast majority are still looking at analytics and insights as another thing that they can sell, as opposed to a way to really add value and transform, reinvent what it is that they're delivering. But there's nothing, throughout history, we have had organizations that are hired guns, right? And I actually I'm an agency bigot. I love agencies. Why? Because they are a huge concentration of talent. So I think that the issue, though, is the business model.
Yeah, I would also add that I think the nature of agencies will shift. I think there was a time where we would pay an agency to produce an asset. That's not going to continue to be a needed function anymore, especially at the price levels we paid about 10 years ago. I don't need an agency to go build a TV ad for $2 million. What I need is a branding agency and an agency to help me establish what the brand message is, but not build an asset for me. And then I need agency partners in a stack that can connect with my data and be smarter around all of my channels and strategies. So I do think that the agency will evolve significantly. And I think with that, some will cease to be relevant unless they rapidly adjust with where their customers are.
Yeah, I agree with Mark and Marissa. I think it will always be important to have good agency partners because one, I think it's unrealistic that you'll ever be able to do everything yourself. unless you're a huge organization. And also, I do think there's a lot of groupthink in a company, and you need actually outside perspective to keep you honest and different perspectives. Both are super important and will never go away. I do think, though, that if you're a consumer company that relies on marketing and spend a lot, it should be an internal core competency. So you should never relegate it to where you're outsourcing something that I think should be a core competency for yourself. It should be supplemented.
All right, well, I think we are about out of time. Aaron, yes? I wanted to thank you guys so much for being here and spending the time. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. I hope you guys have as well. And I'd love to please do a round of applause. Thank you.